Hello, and welcome to my weekly podcast, Through the Bible in 10 Years. Today we are in Revelation chapter 13. Or are we? Well, we are. But we start off with a puzzler. So there is a sentence, and if you're watching the video, the sentence is, "And he stood upon the sand of the sea." And this statement is interesting because some translations put it at the end of chapter 12, and some translations put it at the beginning of chapter 13. Now, I'm puzzling over this one. I think in many respects, in fact, I would say in most respects, it makes the most sense if it goes with chapter 13, because in chapter 12, when we get to the end of chapter 12, we're still talking about the dragon. And the dragon has been pursuing the people of God. And so there's a word called antecedent. I don't know if you know the word antecedent, but sometimes when you have a pronoun like he, let's say this verse says, "And he stood." It could be she stood or it stood, but I think there are three main candidates for who is standing. They are either the dragon, John the Revelator himself, or the beast from the sea is standing upon the sand of the sea. All three of them are he's, so I'm going to say he, and he stood. The question is, who is the he? Now, in the flow of the text, and you remember that the chapter divisions were added in the late Middle Ages, and so we, as educated exegetes, are free to speculate as to whether this sentence goes at the end of chapter 12 or the beginning of chapter 13. Now, when there is no new antecedent, that is, we should have a strong bias towards seeing the antecedent of a word like he as whoever the last he was in the flow. And the last he in the flow is the dragon. However, it doesn't make a lot of sense for the dragon to stand on the sand of the sea, although it could. And the dragon stood upon the sand of the sea because he's waiting for the beast from the sea to come up. Although there's nothing in the words that have preceded to lead us to think in that direction. Now, it could go with the chapter 13 that follows, in which case it would be, "And the beast stood." But the problem is we haven't heard about the beast yet. So how would any reader know that we were talking about a different person here? And thirdly, another possibility is that there should have been one more letter on the word he stood. So the word he stood is estathe. If it had been estathane with a nu at the end of it, then it would have said, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea," and then it would be John the Revelator standing at the sea waiting for another vision. And there are actually some later manuscripts that actually say that. But there's a rule in figuring out what the original reading was, and it goes like this. I'll paraphrase it. Copyists were more likely to fix problems than to create them. It was more likely for a copier of a manuscript to comb the hair of the text, as it were, to make things less messy than to mess things up intentionally. And so it makes sense for a copier to add a nu here to make sense of this. It does not make sense for a copier to intentionally take a nu off. And so the older manuscripts and the ones that have been deemed cleanest, that is, if you take all of the tendencies of a manuscript toward either making something more messy or leaving things as they are or cleaning things up, there's a group of manuscripts that over time we have come to view as manuscripts that are less, they have not cleaned up the text. They are more likely to be original. And so you take the older text and the cleaner text, not cleaner, and the more likely original text, and they pretty strongly read "he stood," not "I stood." So we're going to have to throw out the "I stood" as a nice fix, but not likely. Man, I really go back and forth on this one, but I think because there's no antecedent we just would have no way of knowing the beast from the sea, because it hasn't been mentioned yet. And so I think I'm going to have to go with, and he stood upon the sand of the sea, as being the dragon standing upon the sea, awaiting for the beast from the sea to arrive. Man, I'm not. I mean, it's a difficult thing for me to decide. I think we can decide that it wasn't, and I stood upon the sea. But it's difficult to decide whether this is the unannounced beast from the sea standing on the side of the sea, or whether it's the dragon standing upon the side of the sea. And because there's no clear change of subject, I'm going to go with those who see, and he stood upon the sand of the sea, as referring to the dragon now awaiting for the beast to arrive in chapter 13. And so we now come to Revelation chapter 13. And I saw out of the sea, and this is John the Revelator. See, again, if it said, and I stood upon the sand, that would make perfect sense. I mean, you could suggest that um, the text was very early messed up, and that it really did say, and I stood upon the sand of the sea. And it was just very, very early that the copying got messed up. That's what would make the most sense, frankly. But you don't want to, you generally don't want to go with what's called a conjectural emendation. Although we do have manuscripts that say this, but they're so late, they're probably fixing the problem rather than reflecting the original. In any case, we know that when we get to verse 1 of chapter 13, it is John the Revelator who saw a beast rising, a beast of the sea rising, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads names of blasphemy. Okay, so we have a new character in the book of Revelation, the beast from the sea. Now, of course, if you follow a lot of modern prophecy teaching, you will recognize this beast, because this beast is in the John Darby dispensationalist interpretation, the Hal Lindsey, the Tim LaHaye stream of interpretation. This beast is the Antichrist, or in 2 Thessalonians 2, the man of lawlessness. Now, of course, it doesn't say any of those things. That's a kind of combining together of various themes across the Bible. 1 John, of course, doesn't seem to be talking about a specific individual when it talks about antichrists. It's mostly talking about individuals who deny that Jesus came in the flesh, probably Gnostics of the late 1st century. And so there is nothing, the word antichrist is not used in the book of Revelation. In our previous trek through 2 Thessalonians, I argued that the man of lawlessness was likely someone in Paul's day, because the temple is talked about as if it's still standing. And so that temple, of course, was destroyed. And so in order for 2 Thessalonians 2 to be fulfilled in its most natural sense, it would have needed to have happened before 70 AD. Now here, when we get to Revelation, I'm going to also argue that the prototype for this beast from the sea also comes from John's day. Now, a prototype can have copies. And so I'm not saying that there can't be another beast from the sea in the ends of times. That's up to God. If God wants to fulfill Revelation and 2 Thessalonians 2 in a spiritual way, in a fuller sense, that involves yet another beast, yet another antichrist, that's God's purview, because that's God. It's above my pay grade, above our pay grade. However, I do want to focus on the prototype of the beast from the sea in this chapter. And again, there have probably been many beasts from the sea throughout the years. Hitler we might very well consider a beast from the sea. Stalin, we might very well consider a beast from the sea. There are often beasts from the sea, but there is I believe, a prototypical beast from the sea from John's own day. and we will be revealing who that is later on in the video. Might wait till the last verse. We'll see when we get to 666. But I saw the beast rising from the sea. Now, these 10 horns and 7 heads is an image that we saw of the dragon. So this beast is much like the dragon. They're in cahoots, and of course, in the way that I've taken that last verse from chapter 12, if you want to put it there, those words there, the dragon is waiting for the beast from the sea. They go together like a horse and carriage, and so there is a commonality here. There is a slight difference in the imagery, in that the dragon has the crowns on his heads, while the beast has the crowns on his horns. Interesting. Kester suggests that this beast is even worse. I'm not sure whether I feel like there's enough information to draw that conclusion, but that is one minor difference. The image of the horns and so forth comes out of Daniel chapter 7. So Daniel chapter 7 is fairly significant for the interpretation of this stretch of Revelation. And I would say it's important not in terms of its details, but more in terms of where the imagery comes from. We are drawing on the imagery of Daniel. I don't think we should make we should not consider it a exact continuity with Daniel, because Revelation seems to be cooking his own recipe, as it were. He's using the ingredients of Daniel and some of the prophets from the Old Testament. He's using some of the same ingredients, but he's not cooking exactly the same takeaway. And so I don't think we should try to align things in a really rigid way between Revelation and Daniel. I don't think it works. For example, let me go on to verse 2 briefly here, just to give you a reason why I don't think that works. Verse 2, and the beast that I saw was like a leopard, and its feet like a bear, and its mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave to him its power, and the throne of him. So I guess maybe its is the dragon's power, and that even though it's not we might expect a reflexive pronoun here if it referred to the dragon, but I think in context I'm going to go ahead with and still consider it his power. The dragon gave to him his power, that is the dragon's power, and his throne. Well, I don't know. Maybe okay. Throne could refer. Okay, I'm going to begin to reveal my hand. Throne here could refer to the seat of the Roman emperor. I think that we should see the Roman emperor involved in Revelation chapter 13 here. So let's go ahead and take it the way the grammar would point in reality, and that so that the dragon is not giving the dragon's power, but that the dragon is giving the beast's power. So, and the dragon gave to him the beast's power and the beast's throne and great authority. Okay. Well, the reason I wanted to go ahead is to see that there are 4 beasts in Daniel 7. These are 4 separate beasts, but they're all blurred together into one beast in Revelation chapter 13. This is why I said that Revelation is cooking its own recipe. It's using the ingredients. It's using the ingredients from the 4 beasts in Daniel 7, but it's cooking its own beast, as it were. It's a new beast model. And so we should not expect Revelation to be in a really detailed symbolic continuity with the book of Daniel, or Ezekiel or Jeremiah. It's using the ingredients, but it's cooking its own symbolism, as it were. So there's continuity and discontinuity. These 7 heads, when we get a little bit further into Revelation 18, we're going to see 7 hills, which is a clear symbol of Rome. I'm going to go ahead and stake that claim right now. The book of Revelation was written to 7 churches in Asia. It seems to me beyond any reasonable doubt that anyone hearing the book of Revelation in the late 1st century in Asia is going to think of Rome when they hear of 7 hills. And of course, the Roman Catholic Church doesn't exist, so it's not referring to the Roman Catholic Church. It is going to evoke images of Rome and the Roman Empire. And even though there may be echoes or reverberations or waves, of that throughout history, and maybe even in the end of time, we'll see. We have to start with Rome. That because the book of Revelation was not written to anyone alive today. It was written to 7 ancient churches that have been, and all those people have been dead for a very long time. That is the first meaning of Revelation, because that's what Revelation says. If we take Revelation seriously, we have to interpret it in that light first. And so we simply have to consider the Roman Empire of John's day as the baseline, the first kind of port of call in understanding this stretch of Revelation. Again, there may be later fulfillments that piggyback on that image or that echo that, or if you think of that as the archetype, there may be other shadowy fulfillments of it in throughout history and maybe at the end of time. But we need to start with what it actually meant to the people it was actually written to. And so because of the 7 hills that come later in Revelation 18, I'm going to go ahead and suggest, now it's not 100% clear that the 7 heads refer to Rome, but I'm leaning in that direction here, that the overtones of 7 heads, especially because of what is said more clearly later in Revelation, is probably thinking of Rome, that there are images, that the primary tool we need to understand Revelation 13 is an understanding of the Roman situation, the Roman Empire of John's day. So this beast has names of blasphemies on its head. And this is interesting because I'm going to argue that the fact that the Roman emperors in the late 1st century were looked as divine in some way, and I'm going to show you a coin here in a second, because the Roman emperors were viewed as divine and as lords, Caesar is Lord, that sort of thing, that is blasphemy, right? Because Jesus is Lord and God is Lord. And so for the Roman emperors to be considered divine is blasphemy. And they have names of blasphemy on their head. I put up here a coin from Domitian. According to tradition, and according to maybe even most Revelation scholars, the book of Revelation reached its final form during the early 90s, which is during the reign of Domitian. And I want to point the word divus here. Caesar was a diva. No, he was a divus. He was divine. So this says divus Caesar, divine Caesar, and then imperator, dominator, Domitian. You can see Domitian there. So you can see that on a coin, and there he is. Look, he's sitting. What is he sitting on? Is that the world? He didn't view the world as a globe. That's interesting. Anyway, Domitian viewed himself as divine. And so this would have been problematic. I mean, imagine the conscience, because do I use these coins or not? This coin, for me to buy or sell with this coin, is for me to be participating in a blasphemy. And of course, the other side of this coin had the head of Domitian. So I don't know if that's material or not, but just keep that in mind as we go through chapter 13. If we could take us today and transpose us back into that world, well, we can say about our money. Let's say that our money said Trump is God. Let's say that you had a $1 bill that said Trump is God on it. Do you use it? Because it speaks of blasphemy, right? Do I use that dollar bill that says blasphemies on it? Am I participating in the worship of the president or whatever, if I use that dollar. And so you could see where in ancient times there was a crisis of conscience. uh, I can see it clearly. There would have been a crisis of conscience to buy or sell with this money that proclaimed the Roman emperor to be divine, because of course it's not the divine Domitian, it's the divine um, uh, Jesus, the divine God the Father. So, so the beast has blasphemies, names of blasphemies on the beast's head. And this beast is, again, apocalyptic. It has a combination of images from the book of Daniel. Again, the takeaway is what we might call a gestalt. It's a overall impression. We are not. I don't think we are called to try to figure out what the lion is, or what the what the um, what the leopard part is, what the bear part is. I don't think it's not meant to be taken in that much detail. I don't think it's much more of a gestalt, of an overall impression that we are to get. But this beast sits upon a throne. So again, I really believe, in the light of later parts of Revelation, that this is probably referring to the Roman emperor, who at that time would have been Domitian. Verse 3. And one of the heads of it was as having been slain to death, and the wound of his death was healed, and the whole earth marveled after the beast. Okay, now I do we want to keep the suspense until we get to chapter 18? Well, we will get to chapter 18 soon enough. I believe it's chapter 18 when we get to a more specific image. Sorry, it's chapter 17. Chapter 17 is where we get the more specific image of the seven hills and the five kings, or 8 kings. 5 have already been, 1 now is, 1 will come, and then the beast is the 8th king. Well, I'll go ahead and give away the secret here, the ending. Spoiler alert: Nero, Caesar Nero, who was the 5th king of Rome, was thought and is thought to have committed suicide. He is thought to have put a sword to his throat and cut his throat. This seems bizarre to me. I mean, I'm much more inclined to think that somebody assassinated him, but I'm not a Roman historian, so I'll go with what the majority say. And the majority say that Nero committed suicide. Why would a Roman Empire commit suicide? It's a good question. But anyway, there was, and we know this, there was a rumor that Nero wasn't really dead. This often happens. It was there were sightings of Hitler in South America, right? After Hitler was dead, it was just very difficult to believe that Hitler was really dead, or that Elvis is really, he just went back to his home planet, or he's in Miami. But there is a tendency to find it hard to believe that these larger than life figures are gone. And there were rumors in the Roman Empire that Nero was in fact still alive, and that he had aligned with the Parthians in the east, and that he was going to come back and have his way. He would have his vengeance. We know this is true because of, for example, the Sibylline oracles. The Sibylline oracles have this, it's called the Myth of Nero Redivivus, the revived Nero. And in the Sibylline oracles, we have, and they're later than the book of Revelation, but again, they record this myth of Nero returning. Now, does John believe that? John doesn't necessarily have to believe that to use this imagery. He can build off of the basic framework of that imagery to say that there are going to be other emperors, other leaders who will be like Nero. Of course, Nero, we know, put many Christians to death. The first really significant persecution of the early church was under Nero in Rome, where he blamed Christians for the fire of Rome, and he crucified Christians, and he burnt them in his garden, and he set wild animals on them to tear them apart. He made sport of them in the hippodrome, was it? But what I'm getting at is that Nero is the prototype of the beast from the sea as a Roman emperor. But there will be other beasts from the sea, and there were. And you could argue that during the writing of Revelation, the current beast of the sea was Domitian, perhaps even Domitian being the 8th king. And he is the 8th by one counting, as we'll see when we get to chapter 17 of Revelation. So this image of somebody who had a fatal wound that had recovered, he had been healed, fits very well with Nero in terms of the myth of Nero's redivivus, his return, the myth of Nero's return that we know was in fact a rumor. Again, it doesn't have to be actually Nero. It could be symbolically the return of Nero. Wounded, not literally, but healed, not literally, but healed in the sense that there is another Nero here. Just like we might say, so-and-so is another Hitler. We could say, so-and-so is another Nero. He is the Nero, the one who has been slain, but has come back. And the whole earth marveled after the beast. Verse 14, and they bowed before the dragon, because he gave the authority to the beast, and they bowed before the beast, saying, who is like to the beast, and who is able to make war with him? Now, the word proskuneum can mean bow down, or it can mean worship. And there is a continuity in my mind between bowing before a king and worshiping a god. It's a question of intensity and degree. And so I've gone ahead and put bow down rather than worshipped. It could be worshipped, could be, but I put bowed down as a little bit not quite as strong language, but it could be worshipped. But this is again referring to it could be referring to what we call emperor worship. Emperor worship grew in strength over the course of the first century. And by the time the book of Revelation is written, the emperor cult, where the emperor is worshipped, is going strong, and arguably was strong in Ephesus. And so the worship of the emperor, maybe I should go with worship, given emperor worship. So there could be an allusion to emperor worship here in this passage. And so who is like to the beast? And who is able to make war against the beast? Nobody can beat the beast. Verse 5, and was given to him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, because of course he claims to be God, the emperor, and was given to him authority to act for 42 months. Okay, so here's that image. Here's that image of 3.5 years again. And I argued in the previous videos that this 3.5 years is modeled off. It's modeled off of two things, probably. First, it's modeled off, the image is drawn from Daniel. In the book of Daniel, the 3.5 years is a reference to the time of the Maccabean crisis from 167 to 164 BC, when the temple was desecrated until the temple was restored. Feast of Hanukkah celebrates the restoration of the temple. That's what the image referred to in Daniel. But like I said, Revelation uses the ingredients of Daniel, but cooks a different recipe. And the 42 months here, the 3.5 years, I suspect, again, could be wrong, but I suspect it is built off the time of the Jewish war, when the Roman Empire made war against Jerusalem and ended up destroying it. And so this could be, again, another allusion to the beast waging war against Jerusalem. Now, Nero started that war. The war started under Nero. It didn't end under Nero, but the beginning of the war began under Nero. He's the one that launched the war against Jerusalem. Verse 6. And he opened his mouth with blasphemies to God, to blaspheme his name and his tent, his tabernacle, namely those who are dwelling in the heaven. This is interesting because it seems to me that the wilderness tabernacle has been reinterpreted as the people of God. And again, if the dating is right, there is no temple any longer standing in Jerusalem. And it fits very well in the context of the Jewish war, right? The Jewish war ends with the temple being destroyed. And so this verse highlights that the real temple, the real sanctuary, the real tabernacle is actually the people of God. It's not a building. It is the people of God. And they have been, they dwell in the heavens. They dwell in the sky. That this is the 144,000. This is the people of every tribe and nation and tongue. That it's a swing and a miss that Nero and the other emperors don't actually get the temple. They don't actually destroy the real temple because the tent is the people of God and they're alive and well. Even after they're martyred, they're alive and well because they are in the heavens. Verse 7. And was given to him to make war with the holy ones, with the saints, and to overcome them on the earth, not in the heavens, but on the earth. And was given to him authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation on the earth. But remember, we have already seen how this ends. We've already seen in chapter 7 that there will be people from every tribe and people and tongue and nation in the kingdom of God and in the heavens. And so he appears to, from an earthly standpoint, to have authority over all these, but we know in the end he doesn't have that authority because they will be saved. Verse 8, and all who dwell upon the earth will worship him, emperor worship, that is, not everyone on the earth, but those whose name has not been written in the book of life of the Lamb that has been slain. Notice the contrast. There's a lamb that has been slain, and there is a beast that has been slain. But the lamb is the one that prevails. The beast may prevail for a short period of time. The beast may appear to prevail for a while, but the beast will not ultimately prevail. The lamb will ultimately prevail. And those who dwell on the earth who do not have their name written in the book of the life of the Lamb that has been slain, they will worship the beast. But those who have the seal of God on their forehead, so to speak, not a literal seal, but the seal of the Holy Spirit, perhaps. We are branded by, it's not a visible seal. Those of us who are believers, we are sealed, but we are not visibly sealed. Hold that thought. Those who are not sealed in that way upon the earth will worship the beast, but not those whose names are in the book of life of the Lamb that has been slain. Now, this sentence ends with from the foundation of the world. Again, normally with grammar, you want to go with the closest referent. And so I think the most natural way to take this is the Lamb that has been slain from the foundation of the world, which is a statement upon the plan of God to atone for the sins of the world. That God knew that the world would need atoned, and God planned for the Lamb to be slain from the foundation of the world. There's another way, of course, to put it, and that is in the Calvinist way, and to take from the foundation of the world and put it with those whose names have not been written from the foundation of the world, that it would therefore refer to election, that God elected the saints before the foundation of the world. But again, and I would have a way to interpret that if that's what it was saying, but I don't think that's what it's saying. The most natural way to read it grammatically is those whose name wasn't in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world, so that it's talking about the plan of Christ to die for our sins, not whose names are in the book of life. Anyway, verse 9. If someone has ears, let him or her hear. Okay, now this verse 9, I think, is an introduction to a quote from Jeremiah 15, which follows in verse 10. If someone goes into captivity he departs. If someone is to be killed with the sword, him to be killed with the sword. But here is the endurance and the faithfulness of the saints. So we may die. You know, the beast is going to, and of course this is written to John's day, the people in the churches of Asia may die as the beast wars against the saints. Rome will war against the saints. And on an earthly level, Rome has a pretty good shot of winning. Nero killed a lot of Christians. He prevailed. The Jewish war prevailed against Jerusalem. The Roman Empire prevailed. On an earthly level, empires may prevail. Persecutors may prevail. Hitler may prevail. Stalin may prevail. For a time, the earthly beast may prevail. But, we may be taken into captivity, Babylon, Jeremiah. We may be killed with the sword. Those who were taken to Egypt, some of them in Jeremiah's day were killed with the sword. But we are to endure. The saints of God are to endure and to be faithful in these times of persecution when beasts persecute the saints. And as they persecuted the saints in that day, it is the lot of believers to endure and to be faithful. And of course, as he says, ultimately, we are going to be safe in the sky, in the heavens. Even though we may have to die first, we will ultimately be safe in the heavens. So the first 10 verses of chapter 13 deal with the beast from the sea. And of course, you remember that from where John is on the island of Patmos, where is Rome? It is across the Aegean Sea, across the Adriatic Sea. And so Rome comes to Ephesus across the sea. Rome comes to Patmos across the sea. In fact, this is a picture of the Aegean Sea from the Isle of Patmos, if you're watching the video behind me right now. And so the beast comes, the Roman Empire, Rome and the emperor live across the sea, as it were. So that makes sense of the imagery. But now when we get to verse 11, we see another beast. And this is the beast from the land. Verse 11. And I saw another beast rising up from the land, or from the earth, and he was having 2 horns like to a lamb, and he was speaking like the dragon. So this is the image of the lamb, right? So you have the lamb that was slain, Jesus, and here you have a pseudo lamb, sometimes called the false prophet, although it doesn't exactly call him that here in Revelation. Usually we like to stick to the actual language of the text, because otherwise we run the risk of infecting the text with our preconceived ideas. But this is clearly it's an antichrist. It is, but not the antichrist. I don't want to use that language because, again, Revelation 13 doesn't call any of these beasts an antichrist. And usually, I would think that the beast from the sea is the one that is usually lined up with the antichrist, not the beast from the land. The beast from the land is often aligned with a kind of false prophet or a priest that promotes. So you could have a king priest situation where a king is in the first part of the chapter and a priest is in the second half of the chapter. Again, I want to be careful not to use that language because Revelation 13 doesn't use that language. But we have this pseudo lamb, as it were, with 2 horns, but he speaks like the dragon. So we have an unholy trinity, right? You have the Holy Trinity in Revelation, holy, 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 God the Father, the Lamb, and the Spirit. But you also have an unholy trinity, the dragon, the beast from the sea, and the beast from the land. And so here is the beast from the land. Verse 12. And um, he exercises the authority of the first beast, all the authority of the first beast, on behalf of him. Now, the best interpretation I have heard of this beast is that this beast represents the cult of the emperor. And you could take it in terms of the Roman administration, that is um, the Roman emperor system that reached its way, all the Roman governors, all the administration, the procurators, the proconsuls, and all of those who did work on behalf of the emperor. But it seems to me that there is a spiritual dimension here. And so I lean more toward seeing this as representative of the Roman emperor cult. That is to say, that system that facilitated the worship of the emperor throughout the Roman Empire. And he causes the earth and those dwelling in it that they might worship the first beast, who was healed. The wound of his death was healed. Again, an allusion to Nero, but not perhaps the original Nero, but a copy of Nero. If Nero is the archetype of this beast, then there are other Caesars that mirror him, one of whom is Domitian, right? Verse 13. And this beast from the land does great signs, so that even fire he should make from the sky to come down upon the earth in the presence of humans. This reminds us of Elijah. So there's another parallel here between the two witnesses in chapter 11 and what this beast from the land does. This beast from the land does counter signs. So you had Elijah, who brought fire as a symbol in chapter 11, and here is the beast from the land who's bringing fire. Verse 14, and he deceives those dwelling upon the earth because of the signs that was given to him to perform before the beast, telling to those dwelling upon the earth to make an image of the beast, who has the wound of the sword and lived. So again, this idea of creating images of the emperor may also draw upon the ideas of Daniel, the book of Daniel, because of course in the book of Daniel, there is an image that is made that is meant to be worshipped. And of course, Caligula, who is another beast, another Roman emperor, wanted to set up a statue of himself in the temple back in about the year 38. And so the idea of a Roman emperor wanting to set up an image of himself to be worshipped, and of course in a temple of the emperor, there would probably be a statue of the emperor there. And so again, we have a fairly consistent set of images here. And was given to him, that is to this beast from the land, to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast should speak, and should make as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Again, reminds me of Daniel, where those who do not worship. Now you might say, well, this hasn't happened yet. Well, and it hasn't happened in exactly this way. We have to ask the question again as to whether this is symbolic, or whether this is meant to be something literal at the end of time. All of the biases of this passage are toward things that happened in John's day. And so even if this were to happen in the end times, it wouldn't exactly be a fulfillment of what John is saying, because John is talking about things that were happening in his day. He's talking about things that are soon to take place. Now, again, I'm not telling God is perfectly free to have another set of beasts at the end of time that do these things literally. Again, we'll know if it happens. But I think our first bias should be to read this in the light of the Roman Empire at that time, and probably in terms of Roman emperor worship. I don't want to conclude that John thought that Nero would actually come back. Some did think that. I want to take this as imagery that is meant to symbolize what the Roman Empire did with its emperor worship. Okay, so let's go to verse 16. And he causes, that is the beast from the land, the kind of local Roman emperor cult, local Roman administration, maybe too, maybe they're blurred together. He causes all, both the small and the great, both the rich and the poor, both the free and the servants, that they should give, that the beast should give to them a stamp, a mark, a brand upon their right hand and upon their forehead. Now, remember, there was a mark or a stamp of the elect earlier in Revelation that wasn't necessarily visible. And so I think we need to take out of our mind, the idea, oh, we're going to have a tattoo on us, or we're going to be microchipped. It's all a Bill Gates conspiracy. Let me be honest. We make God look so stupid. I mean, the stuff that's going around about microchips, oh, maybe this is the mark of the beast. You make God look like a complete imbecile with that kind of stuff. Stop it. There is no real indication here that this mark, which again would have in its first place had to do with the Roman Empire of that day, is an actual visible mark. In fact, he goes on to say that someone should not be able to buy or to sell unless they have the mark, the name of the beast. Now, I showed you the coin. Remember, I showed you the coin of Domitian. You could not buy or sell with using that coinage without endorsing the name of the beast, without saying that Caesar is divine. And so it is quite possible that what we're talking about here is that to participate in the monetary system of the Roman Empire was, as it were, to participate in the mark of the beast, was to use this coin. Remember when Jesus is asked, should we pay taxes? And he says, well, show me a coin. And he says, whose picture on it? And they say, well, it's Caesar's. Well, he says, well, give it back to Caesar. He's lost some coin. We have to realize that we cannot really, we're getting to where we can survive on credit cards and things like that. But in that day, you could go a long, long way without using coins. Coins were a particular kind of monetary system in that day, but the average person in the countryside of Galilee, would have done an awful lot by bartering and by trading and things like that. In Jesus' world of Israel, coins were somewhat optional. You needed them to pay taxes. You might need them to pay a toll to get from one place to another. But if you were living on the farm, so to speak, you didn't necessarily need coinage. The New Testament seems to call coinage itself into question at certain points as to whether or not Christians should even participate in the use of coins at all. That if you participated in the use of coins, were you, as it were, buying into the Roman system? As a matter of conscience, when you used a coin that said that Caesar was divine, were you, in a sense, blaspheming God? This is far more likely to be the original meaning of Revelation 13 than some obscure event going on today. And again, I want to, forgive me if I'm too harsh, but sometimes I feel like people don't listen unless they're slapped a little bit. People have been trying to equate the events of this chapter with things, for 100, 200 years, and everybody's been wrong. Let that sink in. Everybody who has said this is what this is. Everybody, 100% failure rate. Every prophecy teacher that has said, oh, this event in the Middle East is what's going on here in Scripture, or this barcode. Remember what was the barcode? There are barcodes on our books. There are barcodes on our food. Remember when everybody said, oh, the barcode is the mark of the beast? They were wrong. 100% failure rate. Everybody who has tried to equate a current event with the events of Revelation has been flat out wrong. Now, again, I'm going to slap you a little bit because we're making God look stupid. How stupid do you have to be to keep correlating contemporary events with the book of Revelation when every single person has been wrong thus far? That is stupidity, and it makes God look like makes God look like an idiot. Stop doing it. Oh, they're trying to get us to go to a cashless society. There is some hacker in some place in the world thinking, oh, stupid Christians will buy this. I'm going to put this meme on Facebook, and the stupid Christians are going to share it because Christians are stupid. You make God look stupid. Stop it. Anybody who thinks that current events correlate to this, you need to stop talking, stop typing, stop putting it on Facebook, on Twitter, because the odds are overwhelming that you're wrong. Prophecy teachers, stop listening to them. Stop listening to their radio shows. Stop watching to them on TBN. Stop watching them. They've been wrong on everything thus far. Hal Lindsey has been wrong on everything thus far. Stop listening to Hal Lindsey. He needs to retire. I'm sorry, Hal. That is my opinion. It's not the opinions of Ken are not necessarily. You can stop listening to my podcast too. I'm telling you, however, we will know what these if now let me say this. If there is a yet unfulfilled aspect to this prophecy, we will know it when it happens, and we need to shut up until it happens and let it happen. But it is far more likely that this imagery was about the first century. Man, it's so frustrating to watch Christians if I weren't a Christian, I'm going to be very frank here. If I weren't a Christian and the Holy Spirit, let's say that the Holy Spirit wasn't tugging on my heart and I weren't a Christian, I would conclude that Christians are not only idiots, but some of the most unvirtuous people that exist. What's that verse? Because of you, God's name is blasphemed among the Gentiles. We need to stop and listen and not assume that, oh, this current event is what this is here. Bill Gates is going to put a microchip in you. Oh, good grief. Stop it. Okay. We get to then now the end of this. Or the number of his name. So what's the number of his name? Verse 18. And here is wisdom. The one who has understanding, let him count the number of the beast, for the number is of a man, and his number is 666. Now, what is this number, 666? Well, of course, 6 symbolically was a number of imperfection. 7 is a number of perfection for them. So 6. So if 777, if that were kind of a kind of God number, 666 would be a very incomplete human kind of number. And of course, Book of Revelation uses 3s quite often. Holy, 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 and so forth. This is 666. So there's at least that dimension. But there is a Jewish interpretive method called gematria. And they didn't have separate symbols for their numbers from their letters. And so you could actually take a person's name. So you could take my name, Ken, and you could treat the letters as numbers. And you could have a number. I haven't calculated the number of my name. I assume it isn't 666. Hope it isn't. And by the way, I'm open to the Lord correcting me. And I'm even open to you correcting me on these things. The opinions of Ken Shank are not those of God's. Hopefully they are. There's a large overlap. But again, I hope I haven't hurt anybody's feelings. I don't like hurting people's feelings, but I do think that the church needs a rebuke here. Not the true church, but the church that's making God look stupid church needs a rebuke. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm the one that needs a rebuke. Feel free to rebuke me in the comments on YouTube. But you could take somebody's name, and if you treated the number their letters as numbers instead of as letters. You could come up with a number. Matthew 1 does this, arguably, with the name of David. The name David, DVD in Hebrew, adds up to 14. And Matthew 1 says the 14 generations is basically saying David, David, David. Now, let me tell you what the number one interpretation of 666 is, by adding up someone's name. Okay, so if you take Neron Caesar, which is the Hebrew for Caesar Nero, these are the letters. I've transposed them. You go from right to left in Hebrew. So we have Neron Caesar, Nero Caesar. So if you take where these letters appear in the order of the Hebrew alphabet, here are the numbers that correspond to these letters. N is 50, R is 200, V is 6, N is 50, and so forth. Q is 100, S is 60, R is 200. If you add those together, they add up to 666. So I think we have too many overlaps here of images with Nero. Somebody who was killed, Nero was killed. Somebody about whom there was a myth of his return, slain but has been healed. Again, that we have in the Sibylline oracles evidence that was a story. When we get to chapter 17, 8 kings, 5 of which are past, and one of the ones from the past is coming forward. Well, Nero was one of the ones from the past. He and Caligula were the only ones that were killed of the first 5. And then we have the fact that Caesar Nero adds up to 666. And it does it from the Hebrew letters, which would make sense because a Roman or a Greek speaker reading the book of Revelation would not know that it added up to Caesar. And so this, I think, is quite persuasive. And I would say that the majority of those who've studied Revelation on a scholarly level have concluded that this is in fact what is going on with Revelation 13:18. Well, this has been Revelation chapter 13. I got some strong words in there, and I'm open to being wrong, but I feel like this is something the church needs to hear, because the church is being manipulated. The evangelical church, I believe, and I was thinking this morning, it reminds me of Paul on the road to Damascus. Paul thought that he was fighting mightily for God, and I feel like a lot of the evangelical church right now thinks that it's fighting mightily for God, when in fact it is opposing God. And I'm praying for God, and if it's me, if I'm the one that's fighting God, he has 100% invitation to tap me on the shoulder like he did Paul and to correct me. But I believe it's the evangelical church, by and large, that is going against God, fighting against God, and it doesn't even know it. It thinks that it's righteous, and it's not. And so I give my rebuke in hope for a repentance and a turning to God again. And I am fully on board with that for myself, if that's what the Lord should reveal. Well, this has been Through the Bible in 10 Years, Revelation chapter 13.